Welcome to the Art of Being Nimble podcast. I'm Glenn Smith and I'm your host. In this series, we'll introduce you to business leaders from around the world who will interview about how they've overcome challenges of operating a business in today's dynamic world. Through their stories, we're going to hear about what problems they've had and how they fixed them and the benefits it's brought them. Importantly, you're going to learn some lessons about what you can then use in your organisation to do similar things. So let's get on with the show and hear the next story. Today, I sit down with Andy Lambert, part of the founding team of ContentCal, a startup that went from humble spreadsheets to a global social media tool used by thousands, before catching the eye of Adobe and its ultimate acquisition. The conversation takes us from hustling at 4:30 a.m. to driving the integration and adoption within Adobe. We explore how consistent customer conversations led to a product market fit, the challenges of scaling a sales team, and the valuable lessons learned along the way. Andy shares insights on personality-led growth and building a business with true user empathy, which provides essential wisdom for entrepreneurs at any stage. So, hi Andy, welcome for joining the Art of Being Nimble. Thank you for talking to us about the journey of ContentCal. Maybe you could start off and just tell us what ContentCal is so we know what we're talking about through your journey, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, Glenn.
You're welcome.
So, I guess I probably need to talk about it in the past tense now, really, but ContentCal was a social media management product. And as the name imaginatively suggests, it was built around a calendar for content. Would you believe? Who'd have thunk it? So, we had spotted a gap in the market whereby so many folk were planning their content on spreadsheets and sharing those spreadsheets across the team and trying to do approvals through all of that. So we thought, well, why don't we try and build a product here? And usually it's kind of great product development advice in general to when you look at a market and see a particular situation where people are making their own solutions to problems, they're kind of home crafting these Google Docs or spreadsheet and email workflows. And when you realize that people care enough about a problem that they've found their own solutions to it, and they all kind of follow a similar pattern but vary a little bit, you realize that this is probably a space for you to go play in. So that's what we created. I can't be credited with the initial idea. That was Alex. I joined him at the point they had this initial idea. I got introduced to him, which we can go into. And then we built ContentCal and we can get into that story. But yeah, social media management tool.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Well, that's going to be one of my first questions was, how did you get involved with the product and the organization?
So very quick backstory, because I've never really considered myself as an entrepreneur, to be honest. My career started in sales and I went into sales because, quite frankly, I wanted money, and my friends told me that sales was one of the best ways of acquiring said money to fulfill my passion for buying fast cars. So that tends to be quite an expensive hobby. So I ended up being fairly good at sales because it's like the ultimate meritocracy. The harder you work, the more money you earn. I was like, this is brilliant. It's easy to do 10, 20% more than everyone else around you and do a little bit better. So it seemed great. But probably like most slightly cocky salespeople, I was like, I'm making this money for someone else. I should do it for myself. This was 2014, and thought I'm too risk averse in general to go ahead and build a business at that point. Just had my first child, and fortunately found a business that existed in the US, but they were setting up in the UK. So I thought, actually, that seems perfect. I can see if I can flex my business building muscles. Maybe I've got the capabilities here. And that went fairly well. Did that for 2 years. That business got sold to Oracle. And that was my first lesson in I really should have asked for equity. That was a big miss, very big miss. But the thing that wasn't a big miss, it's the person I met who I very quickly hitched my career cart onto, a guy called Colin, who was like, can you be my mentor? Sounds kind of sad, but I'm like, you are the person I need to follow. And that changed everything. Who you know changes everything. And I count myself as incredibly lucky to have met Colin. So when that business sold, Colin asked me what I'm doing next. Colin was mentoring a bunch of businesses in this thing called the Accelerator Academy. And one of those businesses was a business called ContentCal, of which he was mentoring Alex, who was the guy that came up with the idea. He introed me to him in March 2016. I liked the idea in general anyway. I've always sales and marketing inherently interlinked. So I've always been fascinated by marketing, saw an opportunity. And most importantly, I was like, saw something in Alex. I was like, I really want to work with you. And then Colin said, well, if you go join Alex, I'll put in £250,000 as your first investor. So arm twisted, we're ready to go. So, and that's where it started.
Oh, fabulous. It made me think, when you said about, the equity thing, it's all about, every day is a learning day and sometimes the learnings are harder than others.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah. That's a mistake you make once.
Yes, absolutely. So when you joined, so Alex had the idea, but was there any technology in place at that point?
Technology would probably be a stretch. It was, a couple of dudes in Poland that have put something together. That was pretty rinky-dink, you might call it. So it's kind of hanging together with hopes and dreams, if you will. And Alex also is a natural pitch man. He's so good in front of investors. So in his initial pitching of his idea to me, it's like, oh yeah, we've already got tons of customers. When I started getting close to it, I was like, oh, there's actually none, or a couple of people have tried it and very quickly turned around. So I was like, okay, right. So we are ground zero here. The product is principally okay, because the thesis was sound. Like I've already explained what the thesis was. So the thesis was sound. And the more I started speaking to people in this market, I was like, okay, they definitely get it. But where we were headed with it, and our product didn't quite align. And most specifically, I think this is a trap that many fall into. And it's a challenge when you're young, you're first-time founders. You get buffeted a lot by the feedback that you get in your network. So we had quite a lot of like early angel investors that all were like our dads. They're like, yeah, you should do this. You should. Oh, in my day, they weren't that old, but like they're like, oh, we did it like this, and none of them had run a SaaS business. None of them understood social media, and we were still too young and naive to have enough confidence in our conviction to say, no, mate, back off. Thanks for your money, but please, can you do one for a minute? Because we understand what we're doing here. We didn't have that level of confidence. And there's still a level of like, and I think there's a balance here to have the humility to listen to those around you, but also to have the confidence in your conviction to know when actually, just because someone said this doesn't mean we need to pivot on a 5p piece, right? It was a lot of like toing and froing.
Yeah.
And particularly a lot of that toing and froing happened around who is our customer. And I spent the preceding 9 years of my life caring deeply about this, writing a book around like how to find your ideal customers, minimum valuable audience, all that kind of stuff that allows us to zero in on who we wanted to serve. At that time, our investors were really pushing us into the enterprise space because we had like Sky sniffing around. Sky were like a bit of a beta customer for us, which unfortunately, and I think lots of startups fall into this, Alex used to be the social media manager at Sky. So he had that relationship. So he got Sky being the first kind of like beta customer. And that's what he had sold some initial investors on. And obviously investors hear Sky, they're like, oh my God, right, we're going to be selling this for like hundreds of grand. This is an enterprise play. And very quickly I had to bring them all back down to reality to go, it's really not. Like, it's very hard for people to differentiate because you've got some early friendly feedback. They just happen to be at Sky, but it's not representative of what an enterprise market might look like. So I then had to kind of take them all on a journey to go, okay, actually, sorry guys, our audience is actually much smaller businesses. That's the underserved opportunity here. And the reason I saw this is because every every other player. And it's a very busy market, right? We entered in, there's the blue ocean, red ocean strategy. We were firmly in that shark infested red ocean. Businesses with literally multi-billion-dollar valuations, we're going after with this little kind of collaborative calendar. But the gap in the market was in the smaller organizations, and that's what we elected to focus on. So I'm conscious I'm going to carry on talking, so I'll let you get a word in anyways.
No, that's fine. So it's interesting. You said that the gap in the market. How did you identify that gap? Was it through those initial conversations, or how did you get to that point?
Simple, really. I targeted myself on having 8 customer conversations a day. And that was the first year of existence. And I know it's not very popular to say these days, really, but I was very much the hustle culture. Up at 4:35, I bang out probably 50, 60 emails, just cold emails by 9 a.m., just handwritten notes with personalization, that kind of thing. It's just pure grind and grunt work in those early days. I wasn't using much technology. We couldn't afford it, and tech is so much better now anyway. But that is purely about, like, if I need to accelerate my learning, you don't accelerate learning by just reading and theorizing about it or having conversations internally. I've always deferred to, like, I don't care about speaking to like those internal meetings or speaking to investors. Let me speak to flipping customers. And that's where my background in sales is so useful, because I've got that natural empathy. And with 8 conversations a day, multiply that by weeks and months over the first year, it was probably I reckon it took 6 months for us to get like incredibly solid conviction as to, like, okay, this is who we're going after. This is the target audience. And also, once you've got that true understanding, then it's not rocket science, this stuff, but you understand who your audience are. That means that your very limited product development resources can then be used in the most effective way. And also, there's a kind of mental model you need to create whereby the audience that you address today isn't necessarily the audience you want to address or will address tomorrow. And again, it's always easier to go up market than down market. Starting as an enterprise and then kind of working out a way to offer like a freemium thing is very hard. So that was it, really. The book that I recommended this a million times. I've actually got literally 2 copies in my bookshelf behind me. It's called The Startup Owner's Manual. And this, the structure, sometimes this is why I love books. So they sometimes like give you the mental model or framework to something that you've been thinking of but haven't been able to articulate. The Startup Owner's Manual did that for me with the whole customer discovery process, which at a very top level flipped the whole sales process on its head. So I joined ContentCal with my kind of marketing and sales expertise, thinking that, all right, okay, we've got a kind of product, go out to market, let's just sell the damn thing. Very quickly, that didn't transpire. So I had to flip the sales approach on its head, whereby rather than, meeting a customer and going like, hey, Glenn, tell me about your problems, I've got a great solution for you. It's like, hey, Glenn, I'm working on something at the moment, and I've noticed a challenge in this broader social media market, a challenge around how people organize and plan content together. So I just want to take, 50 minutes of your time, just have a bit of a chat with you to understand, your current processes and where you struggle around, planning content. And I approach it all from like a very much of a researcher mindset. Yeah. So it doesn't feel like a sale. It's purely customer discovery. But of course, this is the delicate balance. Yes, you approach it as a researcher. Yes, you're in like information gathering mode, but you're also, because you're an inherent salesperson, you're listening for buying signals all throughout that process. And, you'd probably just call this a consultative sales process, but you're not like pushing for a close, because the win that I got out of every single meeting was like, okay, now I'm getting a bit closer to the truth of what are the things we need to build and who is it that we need to serve. That's it.
Well, and again, yes, and those conversations are going to be telling you all their problems that that you know how to what that you can then solve.
Yeah.
I was thinking, that the power of, like you said, you don't, those internal meetings are all very well and good, but it's only until you sort of get out the building and have those conversations. So you said obviously it's easier to go from smaller to big. Was that something you discovered, or was that something you just knew, and therefore those 8 conversations you were targeting the smaller enterprises rather than going for the skies of the world?
I think it was both the advice that we've been given, which had kind of proven to be true, and two, just where you saw the velocity. When I was chasing these larger deals down for like 3 months, you realize that, yeah, we're probably barking up the wrong tree here. And when we started to approach, particularly, and this shouldn't have been rocket science for us again. We started life and we ran this at the same time. ContentCal was also an agency in the background. That kind of kept the lights on as well. So we were doing social media management for people. We were providing a service as well as a software. Very, very hard to try and balance a service and a software business because you end up getting quite heavily distracted. But it did help us keep the lights on in the early days, right? Because you could just make revenue straight away. And this is incredibly distracting, but it did give us, again, great insight into the market, and also gave us a true understanding of what it was like to run an agency. So naturally, what happened is that agencies started gravitating towards us because we're experiencing the pain of how to create content for other people. Again, seems so obvious in hindsight. We were feeling this pain, so we could tell the best story. So our marketing content got better, all of our content strategy got better, our sales messaging got better, and we got to the point that I think it might have been Peter Drucker that coined this term. I forget, but product market fit. We could feel it, and always remember the point that you could feel it because I created a 5-slide deck. So we'd got to this point where I'd got enough strong conviction into who we're going to serve and the things that they deeply care about, all from this kind of customer validation from the startup owner's manual thing, this customer discovery process. So we got to this point and created a 5-slide deck. And by slide 2, everyone was nodding because they're like, yep, that is me. And that's when you feel product market fit. You're like, okay, we've now created something where everyone's like, yeah, you are absolute. I'm in. So, and that then means that, okay, great. We now have a situation whereby we can now scale this sales function. We've got an audience, we understand their pains, and now we've got a repeatable model because I'd gone from taking 3 months to get even a no from people, which is kind of disastrous when, you're going through that whole horrible 4 a.m. start, sending emails, trying and hoping to God someone responds. And then to a point where you have a half an hour call and someone's putting their credit card details whilst you're on the phone. You're like, okay, now this is better. Now we can build a sales function. And now we're past the start. I mean, startup is a bit kind of a nebulous term, but as far as I see it, you're kind of past that initial startup. It's a project more than a business. It's like, yeah, is it a thing? Now we've got to a point where, yeah, it's a thing. Yeah, there's revenues. Yeah, people are now pissed off if the software stops working. So that's also a good signal that things are happening. So that was nailed. So now we go on to all right, what do we do with this? We've got something. I think we found a wedge. We found a wedge in this market. How are we going to then expand that wedge? And that's when we get into the scaling phase.
Yeah, sure. And so as you started onboarding customers, what surprised you the most about, did anything really sort of jump out at you as part of that process, as from their feedback or their, the learning? Because obviously you'd found the product market fit, but obviously there's probably got a lot of nuances about how they were using it, because different agencies, you were an agency, but they would have worked differently to you.
There's always nuances, but I think what we got to is it felt incredibly consistent, which is the thing we found remarkable. And the most incredible thing about this is that we really, I've always been very customer focused. Coming from sales, you end up becoming very customer focused. And even though your customer base is now several thousand users big at this stage, we did a huge amount of like chats with our customers, doing everything to like gather feedback. And at that stage, and this is the most delightful thing about being small, like the amount that we were shipping in the product was awesome. And that was the bit I loved the most, because you would start to coalesce around, like customers will come to you with, customers will already request things they've seen in other products, but your job as a product leader is to then go, all right, what is the correlation between all these things that people are saying? What's the through line that connects it all? And that's where the skill in like product development exists. So then we could not very quickly, but it speeds up the process. When you deeply understand the problems that people are facing, then it means that, okay, well, I know you've told me you want this, but actually I think you're going to need something like this. So a good example was, lots of people would say that they want to be able to find a way that they can reuse content. So, press a button and recycle a post. But actually, we thought the problem is bigger than this. So we created something called the Content Hub, which ended up becoming a really nice library of everything you and your client have ever done, which gives you like performance and the ability to reuse in a central hub. Whereas the user had asked for a button, we were like, we think the problem is actually, we could solve the problem in a more elegant way that differentiates us. So when you kind of share these product updates with your users, it's so nice, because you can be like, well, everyone, we've shipped this, we heard you, and guess what? Glenn, Dave, Sarah, you mentioned all these things. Guess what? It's now live. And because we also made the decision to humanize our brand a lot, as in like Alex and I would spend a lot of time speaking on stages across the country, on LinkedIn, talking about this kind of stuff. It made people feel like they truly care and they truly make a connection. And I think that was a real strategic differentiator, and it became a defensible moat. The bit that I think I'm probably most proud of is like the fact that we would win by the end of our tenure in building ContentCal just for acquisition. We were getting to the point of 1,000 customers per day would come in to request demos of the product, and shopping us against the biggest names in the market. And people would choose us on the basis that they're like, we kind of feel like we know you, we feel like we trust you, and that is everything.
Yeah, firm believer that people buy people. We should come back to that as well when we talk about ultimately the sale into Adobe, because obviously I've seen before when you've got those faces, you and Alex being the face of the business, when you come into a larger enterprise, sometimes the enterprise doesn't necessarily always want that face to be the face. They want the enterprise to be the face, or there's a transition that often. So maybe we'll loop to that at that point. So what you were just saying, when you were at that point with several thousand users at that point, were you still doing? I guess it sounds like what you were saying was you've been taking very much a product management approach. Were you doing that as well as sales, or?
Yeah, at that point, I think we were a good 3 years in, and there's three of us that led the business. Alex ended up working. We didn't plan it this way, but it ended up working really well. So Alex basically spends his whole life doing investor stuff, because we had taken that journey early on. He always had the plan on like a multi-million exit. He's always been incredibly ambitious like that. Always felt like a pipe dream to me. I was just having fun building a business. This is why I never really class myself as an entrepreneur. Like Alex is type A entrepreneur. I just like building good shit and doing it. So yeah, I ended up being everything for customers. So I set up obviously all the initial customer discovery and how that turned into our sales model, and this is why I'm so passionate about marketing now, because when you bake everything in, like your broader product strategy, your marketing strategy and sales strategy are all so tightly interlinked, because they're all baked in true user empathy. And when you've been on the ground with users, you understand the market so intrinsically, it makes everything fall into place, because your broader business strategy is your marketing and your product and your sales strategy. They're all one and the same. Often I see so much disconnection and fragmentation across other businesses. And I think maybe we were just accidentally fortunate that basically you could have called me, I didn't call myself this, but like chief customer officer. So like all of the knowledge of the organization and the customers and who we want to serve lives with me. And then we had Lawrence, who was the other leader of the biz, who does like product. He was the one that liaised with development. And where Lawrence is incredible is that I would funnel all of this customer insight. This is what we're hearing. This is where we see the opportunities. And he's incredible at like distilling that down into what that actually means and how to create the best workflow. At that time, I would have been like, shove another button here, put that in the upper nav, add another feature. Whereas Lawrence he's like just the best, both like hybrid designer and product manager at the same time.
Yeah, brilliant.
So yeah, that was incredible. So you've got 3 people who are covering multiple disciplines, but all with like, we are in our zones of genius, you might call it.
Sure. And it sounds like collectively you're overcoming we're always, as you were talking, reminds me of the Henry Ford quote, if I ask my customers what they want, they'd ask for faster horses. And it's that actually, what do they really want? What are they trying to really achieve? And then how can we do it? So that example of, well, it's not going to be a button, we're going to do that hub. So that sounds great. So you mentioned just now, 1,000 requests a day for demos. That means clearly you've got a lot of pull, a lot of desire to use your product. How do you serve that amount of volume? You must, at this point, you must be well in the growing pains.
Yeah, for sure. And these are great problems to have. So we were there. Now we're in this kind of scale up phase. I made a very typical. I think we made a lot of hiring mistakes, quite frankly, and a lot of similar mistakes. Are basically, it's like a startup rite of damn passage. But it kind of feels like you have to make these missteps. It feels like everyone needs to do it. I don't know. Hopefully they don't need to, because it's flipping expensive. Anyway, we hired junior people and thought like, I've always had this emotional orientated notion that I want to hire people where they're young, early on in their career. They've just got the right level of coachability and desire to build. So that becomes like a blank canvas. Yes, you get people for cheap, but equally, I like the idea of like giving people new opportunities. And there's an element of that kind of works out, but it just felt unscalable, because my initial sales team was very junior. And whilst I love people development, it ended up being an inefficient way of building. And in fact, the sales weren't scaling. And this is about 2018. So we're kind of past product market fit. Yeah, we're getting some good growth, but the sales weren't scaling as well as I hoped they would. I just thought maybe egotistically, if everyone just says the same things I do, everything will be fine. But it doesn't work out. So it got much better when we hired a formal sales leader, and I started to delegate responsibility away from me. And that unlocked scale and growth. And this is where kind of Alex was pushing me on this to think. Typically, I've been guilty of thinking too small and being like, okay, let's just be very pragmatic about it. Alex is always like, no, raise another round and let's go big. And yeah, he was absolutely right as it related to sales. We ended up with a sales team, I think about 15 folk across BDRs, so basically fielding those initial demo requests and then getting them through to the right people, the account execs, to close them, which is the model ended up being quite sales led, or it's like marketing assisted. Like they're all inbound leads, and the sales team were just brilliant closers, where their job really was just to close on the first call. So many of them were closing multiple deals per day, which is quite rare to have this kind of model, given our average sales price was probably about $1,000 per deal. So it's pretty small fry. And to have lots of people, lots of reps doing this was kind of rare, but it ended up becoming a strategic advantage because we could close things quickly. think of too many SaaS businesses, they're either indexed one way or the other. They're either like all sales and no marketing, or they end up being like, hey, it's just product-led growth and people can sign up. A lot of people need to kick up the backside to get over the line, and that's where the sales team were really good. And then marketing was a whole other thing. Probably the biggest single challenge I could point to in marketing and the growing pains that you refer to is when you initially prove out a bit of a model, and we prove this to investors that we invest maybe 10 grand a month in paid Google ads, for example, and it was, the ratios were working out well. So the cost of acquiring customers was in line with our lifetime value of customers. All of that looked quite good. So typically you try and work in SaaS, you try and work to a 3-to-1 ratio. Typically your lifetime value of customers should be 3 times what your cost of acquiring customers is. That's your simple model. But unfortunately, like that number doesn't necessarily scale, especially when you go hard. So we went from about 10 grand a month spend on Google to 100 grand a month. So we went big. And the correlation and that kind of nice balance completely broke down, because you're suddenly like, you're overestimating the demand. And we misunderstood, because we're too naive, and I understand it much better now, the difference between demand creation and demand capture. There's only so much, 5% of a market typically looking for a product. You have headroom. You have limited headroom when you're trying to just like, hey, you're looking for a social media management tool, buy ContentCal. That always will have a ceiling on it. But there's a whole demand creation thing in helping people think about social media content strategy differently. The fact that a calendar is important, the fact that like we care deeply about content strategy and that kind of thing, rather than just scheduling as all the rest of the tools focused on. That was our thesis and our narrative in all of our marketing about the importance of content strategy. And I think we messed up a bit in 2019 by not realizing that enough. You kind of flip between, there's just all paid and then all organic. But then we started to find the right balance from 2020 and beyond, where we had a really good balance between like a huge amount of organic growth that was coming from, particularly from like webinars. And we had this academy to help train people on social media management that was pulling in, at least 1,000, 1,500 leads per month for that content. No, they weren't looking for demos, but they're opportunities for us to nurture and move them forward. And that then became a really solid base to build from. That became our brand. Obviously, there's so much I can't even go into, but our word of mouth was the thing that really drove our growth forward. And that's the bit that's ended up making me care so deeply about this throughout the whole course of my career, about like, how do we create a remarkable business? How do we, in every experience we create for customers, how do we encourage them to tell others about it? Sounds utopian, but when you actually build a product and a business from that lens, from such a customer first lens, it gives you such a unique advantage in thinking about like, when you understand and deeply empathize with people, what are the compelling triggers that's going to help, Glenn tell his friend about it? And we focused a huge amount on that, which just further unlocked organic growth. And 2020 from COVID was, I feel a bit crass saying this, to be honest, but COVID was a boon to our business. Everyone goes remote, collaboratively building content together. Everyone's posting on social, digital marketing goes mad. Everyone's going for online content because we already had all that set up. It just went mental in a good way. And to a point where we got a knock at the door from Adobe.
Right. Just before we get to Adobe, then you talked a little while ago about the hiring mistakes, and you had a young sales team that you were trying to develop. So you brought that sales leader in. Were they then basically spending the time crafting the team to do what they wanted, or did you have to change some of the personnel to bring more experienced people in?
Yeah. All of the initial sales team went, and so initially we basically built again. So this guy called Kayvon, basically hired him as a player coach, hired him to report to me initially. We did the sales together. and to a point where I thought, yeah, he's really strong. Made him the head of sales.
Yeah.
And yeah, then gave him his purview to go build a sales team beneath him. And yeah, he's a much more traditional salesperson than me. I'm a bit like, oh, let's make friends and let's make sure everyone like is happy and has a great experience. And I learned through this. Whereas he's just like, close a damn deal. And you do get to a point in a business where you just don't. Yeah, you don't need fluffy Andy turning up, giving it the big story. You just need someone closing the damn deal.
Sure. Yeah. It's a bit interesting, isn't it? That, that I'm with you, that developing people is great. It's a longer term plan, but wasn't right for you at the time, but you just needed that injection of great capacity and capability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The demand that the time to do that is because the demand was there. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that people typically bump into in early stage biz is that they try and hire someone like Kayvon, because Kayvon's the guy we hired too early, right? Kayvon is a Kayvon, and I'm thinking like he's a category of person. A Kayvon is a perfect person to hire when there's a proven model.
Yes.
And that's where, like in startups, so many startups are afraid of selling. You need someone like me that is just going to be obsessed about what are the things we need to say at the right time that's going to ignite people, because then that gives you all of the puzzle pieces to build from, because then you basically it's like, Kayvon, here's the jigsaw puzzle. You know exactly what you need to do. Your job is now just to fill it in the middle. The outer pieces are there.
Sure.
So there's no guesswork. You're just cracking on. And that's when you start to, that's really like scale up phase at that point, because you're like, we know what we're doing. We have confidence in our conviction. Now it's a case of like, how do we accelerate those components that we've built the foundations of?
Yeah. And before we get to Adobe, I'm interested in what metrics or how were you measuring your progress of success? I mean, obviously, yes, there's the credit card gets swiped, but what else?
Oh, good Lord. This actually brings me out in hives, this thought. I actually hate the process that we created here.
Oh dear.
Every Monday morning meeting, it was a KPI review for an hour across the whole business. Everyone had their lines to put in the spreadsheet. So it's as dull as it sounds, to be honest, but it did give great accountability. Everyone's got their lines in the spreadsheet. Everyone's responsible now basically just becomes a spreadsheet master list of tracking business growth over time across every single metric we discussed every Monday with every functional leader. And if overall content downloads are down, we'll go and diagnose why, because naturally look at all your top of funnel stuff. So first reports around broader leads and sales, top, fine, we get that. But underneath that, there was the paid content performance, as in what do we spend this week? What's the conversion rates? Yada, yada. What's the lead flow? Organic conversion, which is views, new content pieces created as well, and new leads generated through organic funnels. Customer service, tickets raised, tickets closed. Importantly, like churn rate, churn reasons, that kind of thing. So it became... It was the ultimate guiding light for business health. Going away and looking at this. So yeah, it was a business dashboard ultimately across all key metrics, with every functional leader being held to account every single week. So on that point, that is good. That accountability, ownership is good. The downside of looking at all of those metrics at such a micro level, when you look at it on a weekly basis, you end up making decisions that are knee-jerk. And that was a problem that we found in hindsight, especially when you consider things that are like organic content. If views are down, it may well be seasonal, right? So just taking a reaction based off a week, now in hindsight, that's just not a good thing to do.
Oh, okay. So you were having your meetings weekly, but you were also looking through that granular lens of a week rather than a trend.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I think what we started to move towards, and this is only towards right at the tail end, is especially, I think this is very important for marketing. when you, and actually for every single function, is when you zoom out, look at the quarterly trends, and you evaluate that from a bigger life cycle. Because what we actually noticed then when we zoomed out and kind of started to do some quarterly analysis, particularly on our organic content, when you then see it end to end, you actually realize that the sales time, the sales cycles were hugely collapsed. Because for anyone that's gone on and watched any webinar, you'll notice that the amount of like touch points they had with the business was so fewer. And you can only get those insights when you look at multiple data points from a bigger context window. So I think, my general advice is like, accountability and ownership every week is good, but like pragmatism about, okay, something might be down this week, but let's not knee jerk into this now becomes the action for the leader to delegate for this week. It should actually be, okay, let's try and understand a little bit more, but not make a change. And let's maybe zoom out and see if we can get a bit more context onto what's happening.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And did you, I mean, you talked about some of the measures about, your content and the webinars and et cetera, but you obviously had a lot of leading indicators. Had you got to point of maturity where you were able to link those leading indicators through to sales, or were there just a plethora of leading indicators of these things are broadly all positive, then we know sales will be positive downstream?
Yeah, really good question. I think it was through those quarterly analyses we started to see that, to be honest. Everything was tracked in HubSpot. We couldn't have lived without HubSpot, really, because that was like the attribution piece. And the leading indicator really was, well, we actually started to do some lead scoring as well. Actually, I haven't thought about some of this stuff for quite a good while. So starting to jog my memory. But we implemented some HubSpot lead scoring, of which one of the things we ranked really high was like webinar attendance when people turned up, because we started to see really strong correlation between people consuming long form content. And because when you start to see that, and we also tracked other things like website visits, etc. Because when you start to see, oh, right, well, Glenn's watched a webinar, viewed our website 3 times, and then downloaded this white paper or whatever it might be, Glenn's now a 10, right? So now we can start to draw a correlation between the input and then the outcome. So I think in a lot of like us in 2019, 2020 was basically throw a lot of stuff at the wall and see what happens. I think through 2020, 21, of course, you have your indicators and the fact that, oh geez, 1,500 people are turning up to these webinars. We are onto something here. And probably one of the smartest things that we did was the webinars that we had we didn't host them with customers. We host them with people that we would love to be customers. And that gave us a really nice halo effect. So we'd have like the head of social at Monzo, head of social at Innocent. Both of those are like seen as pinnacles of social media in their spaces. And of course, they're not here talking about why we use ContentCal. They're talking about like what they've learned in social, how they build it, how they manage their content strategy, all the things that we talk about. But because it's by association with ContentCal, naturally it gave a halo effect to our brand. And again, none of the stuff that I'm saying today is like, oh wow, that's completely different or brand new. It's the fact also that we did it every single week. We were very good at consistency, and it's probably my strength as well personally of like just plug away. And like the first webinar had 12 people on it and it was completely awful. But like 5 years later, you got Stephen Bartlett talking about, his approaches to content strategy. And then you've got pulling in all of the audience from all across the country. And I think we finally understood what I now define as like content and personality led growth turned into. And that became incredibly strong. And that drove all of our awareness. And then we took a lot of spend out of Google as well. We still had that running because, of course, there's demand. Lots of people now start searching ContentCal. And that ended up cleaning up the kind of demand capture, but the demand creation stuff, couple of things. Obviously, personality-led growth, lots of webinars, lead scoring, and then, create a good model around it.
It was interesting. You say, these things are maybe not new and exciting, but I think the way you've articulated them, it was that consistently in the discipline of application rather than a bit here, a bit there, and a bit everywhere.
Correct.
Sounds like the difference.
It is, yeah.
So let's come on to Adobe. So did you pick up that they came knocking on your door, or did you go knocking on their door?
Yeah, they came to us.
Okay.
Yeah, which was good. So Adobe had spotted an opportunity, I think, to fill a gap in their product suite.
Yeah.
And the product suite was now called Adobe Express. It was previously called Adobe Spark at that time. And it's a fantastic lightweight tool for social content creation. Makes a ton of sense that those users will want to organize and publish said content. So yeah, Adobe were looking for a strategic acquisition in this space. We also saw lots of our users asking for some form of integration in the content creation piece. So whilst we did all the kind of platform and organization and coordination of publishing and analytics and all that stuff, the front end of the process we didn't touch. So logically it makes a ton of sense. Clearly, we'd got to a position, and this is the fascinating thing about like marketing and branding and PR and all the halo stuff. It's like, it doesn't just mean good stuff for customers. It means that, like, flipping hell, Adobe found us, a little company from London.
Yeah.
I think we might be the first ever acquisition they made outside in the UK too. I don't know that for sure, but that's insane. That's insane that they came to us and saw us as serious enough to do that, which still blows my mind. It kind of still feels like a bit of a dream, to be honest. So yeah, there started a rather crazy process in our life, and basically constant anxiety for 3 months. But yeah, it was ended up being quite quick. So I think from the initial convos through to deal completion, less than 6 months. So that's pretty,
very good. And how was it post transaction to have been in a position where you developed and grown your baby to handing over the hands on the pram to someone else and letting them potentially pull it apart and use it in different ways?
Yeah, I don't think it would surprise anyone to say that it is challenging, but I think we had it rather good, to be honest. Knowing people that have sold their companies to PE and things like that, right? That is then kind of asset stripping, and it's pretty hard. So of course there's the primary downsides where quite a lot of our business Adobe didn't need, right? Personnel wise, I should say. They don't need a sales team. They don't need a marketing team. They don't need a customer success team. And that was the majority of our employees. So, very, very early on, as you announce it, and us, you founders management team are like, pop in the champagne, like, we're here. But, you're being very mindful of the fact that everything that you've tried to build and scale in the scaling phase, you realize that there isn't, the end of the road is kind of in sight, which obviously there's a lot of people that had options in the biz. So they, a lot of people did fairly well, which is wonderful. But people saw the writing on the wall for themselves, and many of them got out before. But we also, and Adobe were amazing at this, actually, about working really hard to speak with everyone in the business and try and find suitable roles for them if they could. And yeah, Adobe are seasoned acquirers of companies, and yeah, the amount of like respect they had for that was amazing. So that's why I class this as very lucky, because if it is another PE firm that did it, they'd be like, yeah, it wouldn't be that empathetic, put it that way. So that was good. Well, good in a way, but still very difficult when lots of people are leaving. There's, in the company, there's quite clear winners and losers.
Yeah, of course.
It just stuck a bit.
Yeah. And for those that migrated into the business, how did you find the translation of the culture? Because obviously, as a business, you're a startup, you're quite, nimble as an as an organization, dynamic and reactive. Adobe, I'm not saying, that they're a large company. Large companies by their nature have scaling and organizing, pointing in the same direction challenges. But even ignoring that, there's just going to be two organizations will always be different, even if there were two small organizations. How was it? Was there a culture shock to people?
I would say the culture shock is in velocity, right? And in not being able to do the stuff that you wanted to do quickly enough. Yeah. And that's a real struggle. Yeah. Speaking for me personally, I'm a person that values speed over perfection. And because, most of your bets you're going to get wrong anyway. So you might as well just ship as much as you possibly can and then figure out what lands. And that's not Adobe way of working. And that's been really challenging for me to basically try and mitigate who I am to a degree. That being said, working with people at Adobe, and this isn't a corporate answer, this is like me speaking from my heart, is that they wanted also for us to bring that startup vibe, to have that slightly arse-kicky attitude of like, we are here to get shit done. And the leadership team have really empowered that, which is great. So that's encouraging. But of course, it's no way near the levels of like, it's busy, it's very busy, but it doesn't have that same level of shipping velocity because like we understood something from a customer and then we shipped it. You know how I was talking earlier on about like the reason I speak about it with so much passion is because I miss it immensely. And and because you don't have that same level, you already called it out, Glenn, you don't have that same level of customer facing interaction. I've tried to kind of find that where I can, but it's not the same as like, building a company, speaking to people, going away, figuring out how do we solve a problem, telling them the next day our plan for it. The reality ain't going to work.
And I suppose some of that's going to be the risk appetite of an international company, but also, your scale probably is a drop in the ocean compared to their scale, and the need to serve an international market and the joys that comes with it.
That is true, and I think that's this. I'm free to go, but I'm still here from my own volition. The reason is like I fell into this thing. Like I said, salesperson, ended up building a biz and, winning the gold medal on the first time around. And does that mean that I'm particularly talented? Probably not. Lucky? Yeah, definitely. And when you work with, because I've never worked in like a big product company like this, and when you work with Ivy League MBA people and consider what it's like building a product for multiple millions in Lord knows how many countries, every country, and what it means to do proper accessibility, localization, that stuff. Like my mind was not attuned to that kind of scale and ambition, and thinking like we just write stuff in English and ship it and see what happens.
All is good.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't care about like, how would this work if someone can't type? How would they interact with it if they can't? You're like, these questions I've never even, slightly embarrassed to say, never even thought, never even crossed my damn mind. So I think the very interesting thing is like the amount I've learned in the last 3 years post-acquisition of like what it takes to build a product with rigor. I'm like, okay, this was clearly a gap in my understanding. So whilst yes, that whole kind of shipping velocity, getting shit done quickly, downside, miss it tremendously. And I probably, it's probably no surprise, I will go back there at some point. But it's amazing. I didn't know what I didn't know, right?
Yeah, of course.
And I think this has been super interesting experience. That is for sure.
And what about, we talked earlier about, particularly yourself and Alex being the faces of the business. How does that evolved as you've gone into Adobe? You're obviously very active on social media still, as you would imagine, based on the nature of your work and what the conversations we've had. But what was Adobe's lens? Were there sort of a plan of how to turn down some of used characters and turn up Adobe the brand?
Yeah, I was super cautious about this. So there's a couple of plays in this, because firstly, post acquisition, I wanted to be a good citizen. Basically, my mindset was like, make this integration go well. Don't fuck it up, Andy. Sorry about my language, but basically that was my process. So be the good citizen, fall in your lane, make sure it gets done. And then probably that was like 2022, 2023, like, okay, so a lot of the core integration work is done. We're starting to find our feet and start scaling it here. And yeah, a huge part of my personality is, as you can tell from this combo, is being out in the market, talking to people, yada, yada, doing that kind of stuff on LinkedIn and events, yada, yada, yada. And yeah, I kept on asking folk at Adobe, like, does anyone mind? Like, is this okay? And everyone was like, I don't know. I was like, well, screw it, I'll just do it then. So, and what's ended up happening is that Adobe have really latched on to the fact that someone's willing to stick their head above the parapet and talk about this stuff. And yeah, they've ended up chucking me on a whole bunch of stages across the world. And to be honest, over the last year, that's been the thing that's really kept me energized, because yeah, it's those kinds of opportunities. And I think that really just speaks volumes about the fact that so few people want to do this whole kind of personality thing, because it still feels deeply uncomfortable. Like this whole personal brand still feels kind of ick, but it's so important. And Adobe realized how important it is to me. In fact, I was consulting members of the leadership team, like top tier, of like what they need to do to build their own personal brand on LinkedIn, for example. And you realize that actually it's just people. It's not because people are doing it because they're not allowed to do it. It's because they're like, I don't know how. And I think we're starting to see this across. I learned this through the process of building ContentCal, and now seeing this at Adobe, like this whole personality-led growth thing is, yeah, it's only getting bigger, and the impact that the human has in how they make decisions, even with like enterprise products like Adobe, incredibly important.
It does seem like, from what you're saying there, that you're being a bit of a poster boy for employee advocacy, as is a popular term in the social media industry at the moment. Yeah,
there's definitely a thing. Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this for years, but eventually it'll start catching on. But at least I think now executive branding as well is starting to become a thing. You see, I think LinkedIn put out some data that at least now 36% of the FTSE 100 are now on LinkedIn, which is still far too low. But the fact that we're talking about that is good, means like we're heading somewhere. But yeah, like I say, there's always pros and cons. But again, I think this is, it's been a really interesting journey. Alex, my co-founder, has actually just left, so he's now doing another CEO gig, a scale up actually. So he's gone. Yeah, so I won't be here forever. But it's one of those chapters. Life is just full of chapters, right? So it's Absolutely. That chapter of like, okay, I clearly had a gap in my knowledge. This is very interesting. Like, careers are always squiggly, and lots of people ask, like, why haven't you gone and created something else? But like, well, there's always so much interesting stuff to learn. And if you feel like you're still learning, you're still growing your broader context of the world. And when I go and do it again, good Lord, one, like, there's a lot of mistakes I'm not going to make a second time round, and I'll still make some, no doubt. And two, like, my broader understanding of what it takes to build remarkable products, just completely different now.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and but having fun with interesting people doing interesting things is a great place to be, isn't it?
That is it.
So if we were just to recap then, or to think back, if someone was is in startup land, what would your overarching advice be for someone who is in that early stages as a closing recommendation for them?
How early?
Well, maybe at the product market fit stage, because I see a lot of organizations having a solution that is looking for a problem to fix and has jumped that bit. So maybe it's trying to work out, what problem are you trying to fix?
Basically read Startup Owner's Manual. You only needed the first 2 chapters, and
right, okay.
that'll be it. But yeah, a company is purely built off the back of a customer problem, and that you don't get that by theorizing. You get that by endless conversations, embedding yourself in the market, and we can all approach it in different ways. But I did that through conversations on one-to-one on phone. I did that through trying my best to comment on threads on Facebook groups and Reddit, even when I was like, I'm not really sure if what I'm saying is quite right here, but you only know by having a pun. And turning up to every single marketing or social media event I could reasonably get to, because then when you drown yourself in the industry, you drench yourself in the knowledge of the industry, then you can find the deeper you understand an industry, there are so many product ideas that just come to your hand, where it's likely that even if you had that initial idea now, it'll probably change, because as soon as you start speaking to someone. And that's typically my advice. Again, it's not game changing, but many people they skip the step, as you say, Glenn, because they feel uncomfortable, or they're slightly, it is a nicer place to be when you've got like a little prototype and you've got this kind of Miro board flow of what you're going to do and like talk about what it could be. The reality is, it's like your prototype or product will likely get torn a new one for the first time that you speak to a customer. So it will serve you to do that early.
Fabulous. Well, Andy, thank you very much for your time today. It's been very, very enjoyable listening to your journey, and a lot of hard work has got you to where you are. So congratulations to you and all the leadership team that got you to there, and good luck for the future.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I've had fun making it. I'd be thrilled to hear your feedback or suggestions for topics you'd like me to explore. Email the show at podcast@nimbility.co. You can also check out all the other episodes in the series at nimbility.co/podcast. If you've enjoyed the content, it would mean a lot to us if you could subscribe and rate the show in your podcast app. Your support helps others discover the show and allows us to keep spreading the word. So until next time, thanks for listening.